you. I'm going to be talking about how steps we can take to protect the sexual health and reproductive rights of street-based sex workers in Christchurch. Those of you who have travelled might not be aware, but the residents north of Manchester Street have reached out to the council and asked them to adopt regulatory measures to prevent sex work in certain parts of Manchester Street. And this is concerning to us for reasons I hope to demonstrate. History, I think, as Gillian's touched on, when there was criminalisation, sex workers are always vulnerable, and street-based sex workers are most vulnerable. Less of an issue, much less of an issue now that we've got the PRA. And the other historical thing of note is that sex workers have worked from Manchester Street for at least 20 years from their traditional location. So again, those of you who are out of town, Manchester Street's one of the main central streets. And just to put a context of why this issue fits within a sexual health context. This is the working definition. It's not meant to be relied on, like referred to as authoritative. And I wasn't going to talk about the migrant sex work issue, but it became apparent yesterday that there's not a great deal of awareness of the harms. Section 19, subsection 2 is the section that prevents any person holding a temporary visa from providing commercial sexual services in New Zealand. And it's slightly relevant to this issue as it demonstrates the harm that regulatory bans on sex work can create. So, as Gillian touched on, screening during negotiations. Screening is a term to describe when a client pulls up in a car and the sex worker sort of scans and sees, is there anything dodgy in the car, are there other people hiding in the car? And in countries with repressive models like criminalisation and the Nordic model, this doesn't happen. A lot of sex workers actually rely on gut instinct too, and it's much harder for them to gauge the information necessary. If it's off, the deal's off. That's a reference to condom use, which is much easier for sex workers to negotiate now. And improve relationships with the police and reduced opportunities for exploitation. So, street-based sex workers in Christchurch in 2017. Traditionally, street-based sex work took place in the more commercial part of Manchester Street, which is south of Beeley Avenue. And after the 2011 earthquakes, the CBD was cordoned off. So sex workers had so that meant no pedestrians, no vehicle traffic, nothing. So sex workers moved to the residential part of Beeley Avenue. The residents have been complaining to the council about some issues associated with this pretty much since 2011. And the council haven't taken any active measures. So they engaged a lawyer, Duncan Webb, who's also the Christchurch Central City Labour candidate. He sought to enforce the public places trading bylaw, which requires people who trade in public to have a licence. Soliciting isn't actually trading, and so that bylaw is not appropriate. But rather than think, perhaps there's another non-regulatory approach we could take, the council have asked that a bylaw be drafted specific to this issue. And we've sort of said to the council, hang on, well, what about non-regulatory measures? There's a study that Gillian's undertaking. The results will be available next year. there are lots of other options, like providing toilets and rubbish bins and things in areas where they prefer sex workers to move to. And there's overseas evidence of how non-regulatory approaches can work to effectively zone other than a bylaw, but because the council have been ignoring the residents for so long, they feel like they need a big stick. They feel like they need and they've admitted that freely. So problems with the bylaw, just like the ban on migrant sex work, it creates, it's pseudo-criminalisation. It means that what the sex workers are doing is illegal, and no, it's not a criminal offence, but you can be fined. And, you know, we've heard references to the terminology used by street-based sex workers is getting done. You know, we're going to get done for working there. So that, the sentiment's the same. So it would reintroduce all the harms associated with criminalisation, damaged police relationships. Screening difficulties, that's really concerning because that process will be hurried. The reality is that sex workers are working there because that's where clients go, so that will continue to happen, but there won't be that empowerment and agency that we've seen with full decriminalisation. And also stigma and discrimination. This is something that you do see with bans. There's, for example, there's a blog referring to migrant sex workers as immigration freeloaders that's currently circulating, and I think the law can really cause a lot of stigma and discrimination. The Victorian sentencing manual that I've referred to there, unfortunately that's not Victorian as in 19th century England, that's Victorian as in the state of Australia. And the sentencing manual, which provided guidelines for judges on how to sentence rapists, the wording's apparent. If you raped a sex worker, you were guaranteed a lighter sentence than if you raped a chaste woman. That was only removed from the sentencing manual in 2014. So that's, and the stigma, because they're doing something illegal, it makes it okay for people to use derogatory terms, and that's what's going to happen with, well, it's almost inevitable, experience speaks that that's what will happen if we have this bylaw. They shouldn't bloody be there, that kind of sentiment. So the primary, well, another issue with the bylaw, whatever your opinions on street-based sex work and where it should and shouldn't happen, is it won't work. We saw that with criminalisation. It's ineffective. And that either hasn't been fully recognised by the council, or it's not something they want to turn around and say to these residents, which is quite frustrating because that's, yeah. So what else might help? I've mentioned international models. Zoning is a policy approach that has been explored in other jurisdictions, primarily the Netherlands and the United Kingdom. So that's a carrot versus stick approach. So what the council are proposing is a big stick. What has been done and worked overseas is the carrot. A group of Catholic nuns in 1982 in Amsterdam set up a living room where a safe place for sex workers to go. You know, an area where they could get tea, coffee, condoms, access to sexual health services and support, and I've referred to Manukau. Unfortunately, I don't have a citation of the working paper there for you, but Manukau had this issue too. Their residents were really vocal. They were leaving notes on clients' cars, threatening to go to their families about what they were doing. And what the council did there is arrange for some mediation to take place. Mediation with residents and street-based sex workers is actually quite effective. There's a really nice anecdote of a resident in the commercial part of Manchester Street who did have a kōrero with street-based sex workers, and the relationship became quite positive. And recently someone was breaking into her partner's car, and one of the sex workers contacted the police for her. So, any questions?
Sunita.
Yeah, I just wanted the reason migrant sex workers aren't allowed to work here is because they don't have a work visa.
No, if they hold a temporary visa, so if they have a study visa, they can't, or if they have a visa to work as a waitress or a waiter, they can't do sex work. It's the only job that's banned, in which singling it out like that has the, consequences of stigma and discrimination. We've touched on.
Yes.
Yes.
The question about regulation. Christchurch does, I'm resisting the trade spaces bylaws. We do have a busker's license in Christchurch that we have to pay if we want to go busking. And it's kind of owned by the buskers. They're very supportive, they look after each other, they have their own system where they will only pick a spot for a certain amount of time. They let each other know where the good spots are around town. And one of the problems with any law, as you've seen from the migrant clause, is that as soon as you make a law, you exclude people. And one of the big problems on Manchester Street is people who are outside of the PRA, which might be migrants or it might be people under 18, are often subject to violence from other sex workers. I think if say, the Prostitutes Collective owned the process and they had a similar one to that of the buskers, the money's their own, they can use it for perhaps appropriate security instead of people who often are not experienced in managing difficult situations. Just like in the old days, we would have bars that were managed by, we had bouncers who were thugs on bars. Now we have a proper system. So those kinds of issues could be owned by the industry, possibly by the collective, so that they could manage it themselves, rather than seeing it as a stick to hit them with. It could be their way of managing the process on the street and providing the kinds of services that they've asked for.
We are being consulted as part of an interagency working group. What has actually happened is we have been working with street-based sex workers to encourage them to go south, and it's been effective. Numbers have reduced from about 16 street-based sex workers in the area to 2. And one of the things we've asked the council to consider is postponing the bylaw to see if that could continue to be as effective as it has been and get the number to 0. That's sort of our version of the mediation that took place in South Auckland. The council, no, they don't want to wait and see if that could continue to be as effective as it has been, which is, but there's data collected that shows the numbers dropping from what we've been able to provide in outreach services. Just another question about your comment that street-based sex work, there's some migrant workers and under 18s exposed to violence by other sex workers. That's an that's not an anecdote that we're familiar with. They are exposed to violence and exploitation, but it's quite, I can't think of any instances off the top of my head where it's been at the hands of another sex worker. I was wondering where you got that. Right, so when you said it was from other sex workers. Okay, so it wasn't from other sex workers. Cool.
The minders, I should say, who are the ones that are involved in that kind of violence.
No, that's not our experience. That's more likely to be a minder than another sex worker, but at the end of the day, it's people posing as clients and partners.
Thank you very much. Oh, sorry. Oh, yes, one more
Just
question.
very quickly, thanks, Bridie. We're more and more hearing some of the impacts and consequences of internet porn. So I guess my question is, have the workers noticed an increase in expectation from them to perform more violent and aggressive sexual acts with their clients as a consequence?
No.
Great.
Thank you.